report, and I yield that time to Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Appreciate it a lot. You know, if you watch this channel a whole lot, you might see me on the floor a lot talking about forestry and water, whether it's California or the whole West. And I, my colleague from Utah, I know it greatly affects him too, the way the forest fires and lack of forest management it's appalling. And why do we have to suffer this year after year when we know what actually works, when the Forest Services should be doing its job and treating more acres at a timeline that is much more rapid? We'd want to say increase the pace and scale of doing so, and it just doesn't happen. And we know they face lawsuits all the time, but at some point we have to be able to beat the lawsuits, let them come, but go get the work done, and be bold, be strong, and take them on. Because, you know, after some point, it's got to be proven that what we're doing is the right thing, even though you have a liberal judge in San Francisco or somewhere that's trying to say, oh, you got to study, restudy, once again, for a salamander or something like that. Well, when you have the kind of destruction that we see time and time again in our forests, in especially the western states, then we'll just keep suffering it. And there's no reason for that. There's no reason. So the Fix Our Forests Act, working on it this week here, my colleague and chairman of resources, Mr. Westerman, has been working a long time on this. It's a very practical, bipartisan plan to tackle the wildfire crisis and finally start managing the forests correctly. We see the destruction. Excuse me. One fire in my district called the Dixie Fire a 3 years ago was 1 million acres. Several other fires in the 6-digit number, the North Complex, the Camp Fire, several 100,000 acres, but also took 85 lives of the town of Paradise. And what we're seeing is in the destruction in Los Angeles, we have, it's unspeakable what's going on down there. And unfortunately, I've already lived that in 3.5 communities of mine in the North State that are almost completely lost in fires the last few years. Pardon me. And it's heartbreaking, and it's mostly avoidable. You know, you're going to have fires, they're going to happen, but if you have managed lands, then it's much easier to put fire out and control it. And so when you look at the picture here, a managed forest is a better forest. It's better for the forest health itself. It's better for the wildlife in it. It's much easier to control fire and put fire out the way fire behaves. Is that when you see this managed forest here on the far side of this poster, you see it's thin. And this is how forests used to look 120 years ago. We've let them fill in too much because we've had the stance of putting out all fires, or at least we did for a while, and so the forest became built up like this. They're very dense. It's hard for the wildlife to even get through there, let alone, you know, the old standard was could a cowboy ride a horse through there like when the first explorers came to the West. You can't now. This is a tinderbox. Trees compete for very limited water supply, especially in a drought period. When they have to compete for limited water, it kind of harms the tree. The tree struggles, and then it becomes weak. It becomes susceptible to insects that are just waiting to take advantage. And they know a weak tree. A tree's self-defense mechanism is the sap that it produces when it's healthy. When that sap is there, if a borer tries to bore into that tree, the sap tends to push that insect out. It works pretty well. But if the tree's weak, it doesn't make nearly as much of that sap, and the tree gets basically over time killed. You should see an area in eastern central California, east of Fresno, as we've gone to camp up there before. This area here looks all green, but if you look at that area, about every other tree is gray. And if lightning ever hits that, if something happens there, it'll be yet the next fire, and they keep happening. The park fire that happened in Chico, California, near my home, 400,000 acres blew from just that area east of Chico all the way up to basically right near Lassen Park, a long ways, 400-something thousand acres. And we can't get used to these 6-digit numbers for fires. And the amount of resources it takes, the amount of firefighters and the amount of people that put themselves in a dangerous way to do this. It's just unnecessary. So let's defeat these environmental losses. Let's defeat these naysayers, because this makes sense here. This doesn't. We keep losing this way. And so when you see that the issue in not that one, this we'll take Southern California, since that's the topic right now, you know, and for good reason. We have to manage these grasslands and these brushlands that are around. They're not forested per se. That's a little farther east of LA in those areas. But it's the same thing. If this brush is managed, then they have a much better chance when the Santa Ana winds come up every year of being able to control or stop the fire. It won't be perfect every time, but it gives you a fighting chance. And they had been doing it, but for some reason this year they suspended that work. Budget cuts, what are they spending the money on? And that's been a hot topic here, of giving California money, and yet they're not helping themselves, it seems. That's my home state, and I've been frustrated for a long time. They spend a lot of money on a lot of other things. They want more federal money when they're still wasting money in high-speed rail, want to give a whole bunch of money more to illegal immigration and a bunch of benefits for that. The state's even trying to set aside $50 million to fight Trump. What is that all about? And they want to come asking for money here. They say, well, you're putting conditions on us. Like, well, you're not acting very, very properly. You're not acting in a way that's responsible when you should be focused on things that are keeping the public safe. The water supply that ran out in the area by Pacific Palisades didn't need to run out. Now, maybe they should upgrade their fire hydrant system and have larger lines that can hold more water at a time, but they aren't doing that. The lake that was nearby was empty for almost a full year. So when you see the work that needs to be done not getting done, what is everybody supposed to do? What are the other 49 states supposed to say? Like, well, okay, we'll keep doing what you're doing, we'll give you money, you know? But all the complaining around here is about conditions. So when you don't do that, this is what you get. We've seen it in vivid colors and coverage here. Thankfully, the wind had subsided somewhat in Southern California, and they're getting their arms around it somewhat, but the wind can come back, and who knows what it'll hit next. So when we talk about what we need to do in the Fix Our Forests Act, we need to pass this legislation. I can't believe the arguments on that side of the aisle against it. It doesn't make any sense, because we need to manage these lands. The federal government is in charge through the Forest Service 193 million acres, okay? And their ambitious goal is to treat 2 million per year. That's 1% per year. Well, if you do the math, that takes 100 years to get over all that. And so we get, although this is the city situation, it doesn't look that much different. When I was standing in my home district next to a town named Canyon Dam, which had that same orange glow 5 minutes before the town of Canyon Dam disappeared. There's no reason for this. Fix Our Forests Act would be a very important step in managing forests in a way that is successful. President Trump has been leading the charge just in 2 days on the executive orders, not playing around with the climate change game, not playing all that, instead wanting to move towards water supply for California, moving towards forest management, and we'll be working with him on that more so. He gets it, he understands it. This is him in Paradise, California saying, why aren't you managing these lands? Governor Newsom stands there empty-handed. 6 years later, after that fire, 6 years later, empty promises, with very little land having been managed the way it should. So I'm really glad we have President Trump, who understands this and is going to do everything he can to help, and we will help supply him the legislation, such as the Fix Our Forests Act, which, again, the things it does, particularly, it expands the clearance zone for hazardous trees around power lines, a bill I've been carrying personally, as it was one of the fires in my district, known as the Car Fire, was caused by that, and 2 others caused by that, power lines and things. It directs the Forest Service to expand the use of livestock grazing. There's a concept, livestock grazing. We know it works, and it works all through the West. And they try and shut that down, like you don't get the permit for that. You know, it might affect the species. It actually is found to actually help species when the cattle keep the noxious weeds and such down. As they've made it more and more difficult to keep those grazing permits and grazing abilities there, including a very heinous one going on in a Northern California park right now, where they're kicking the growers, kicking the cattle people off the land after many years. So we're also talking about looking at having a Western headquarters for the Forest Service instead of in Washington, D.C. They need to be based where the forests mostly are, where the problem usually is, you know? The idea of migrating the Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, USDA, well, we put it where the issue is, especially the Forest Service. And that's the idea. It's in this bill as well, excuse me. So it will take advantage of local expertise, people that actually know and live with the conditions. They know the wind patterns. They know what things look like, instead of a fire team maybe coming from somewhere else and maybe not making the right call on how they should treat the area. So Fix Our Forests Act is a giant step in the right direction. I support it wholeheartedly and ask my colleagues to jump in on and have it be a bipartisan effort. There's nothing wrong with this bill. Let's do it. I yield back.